Imagine a night in 1970 where a peaceful home was shattered by unspeakable violence. A Green Beret, a loving father and husband, entangled in a crime that would grip the nation. This is not just a crime. This is the Green Beret murder mystery. Welcome to the very first video of True Crime Desk. I'm Richard. Today we're going to be diving into the puzzling case of Dr. Jeffrey MacDonald, a case that blurs the line between duty, family, and a night of unthinkable horror. This is a little bit of an older case here, but nevertheless interesting. It's one that they made a couple movies on, and we'll discuss that later on. So, with all that being said, let's get into the case. Jeffrey MacDonald was born in Jamaica, Queens, New York, and he was the middle child of Robert and Dorothy MacDonald. Now, he had a younger sister named Judy and an older brother named Jay. And he was raised in a relatively poor family. And his father was very strict. But I've never found any evidence anywhere that his father was violent. He just expected excellence at all times, which is not that uncommon back in the 70s. Now, when Jeffrey was in high school, he was the president of the student body. He was voted most likely to succeed, and he was also the king at the senior prom. Which, surprise, surprise, we see this all the time. So you're going to notice in this case, and probably some in the future, if you haven't seen that already, is that these people that are voted most likely to succeed and really popular in school, a lot of times they end up being a scumbag. So I don't know why that is, but it seems to happen quite often. Towards the end of his 8th grade, Jeffrey became acquainted with a girl named Colette Catherine Stevenson. He would later claim that he saw her and her friend walking down the hallway and thought she was the prettier one of the two, so decided to ask her out. She obviously said yes. They went to the movies, had a good time, and so they were dating for the rest of that summer. When the following summer came along, she came out to visit someone at Fire Island and told Jeffrey at the time she no longer wanted to go out with him. After Colette and him broke up, he dated a girl for a short while named Penny Wells. But then after her freshman year in college, they decided to get back together again. So from that point on, they were dating. Now, at this time, Jeffrey was dating a bunch of other girls at the same time as dating Colette because he's a class act, as you'll see. But he later decided to marry Colette when she became pregnant, because once again, he's a class act. And so the two of them got married, and Colette decided to leave school so she can raise her child. Jeffrey joined the Army in 1969, and he took 6 weeks of training, physician training, to be a doctor. He later volunteered to be part of the Green Beret Special Forces Unit. Green Berets is a Special Forces Unit part of the Army. And so he volunteered for that. Now, when he volunteered for the Army, or when he enlisted in the Army, that is, he assumed that because it was 1970 that he would be going to Vietnam, or a possibility to go to Vietnam. But he later learned that being a Green Beret physician made it very unlikely that he would be sent overseas. Now, in my opinion, because he was a Green Beret, considered a badass, I guess you'd say, you'll see that it influenced that case a little bit because of his status, as they say, or as the British say, status in the military. So before we go any further, I want to go over, I want to talk about the victims in this case, because to me, that's what this case is all about. I mean, we're going to be talking about Jeffrey for sure, but I want to make sure that we mention the victims because it's really important. All right, Colette, who was his wife, as we mentioned earlier, she was 26 years old at the time. Kimberly was his first daughter, and she was 5. And Kristen was only 2. Now, I don't know if I mentioned it or not, but Colette was actually pregnant at the time and with her first son. So there actually was 3 children. So total, there's 4 victims. So I know a lot of people think that Jeffrey, to this day still, think that he is innocent. And that obviously a lot think that he's guilty according to the legal system does. And that's fine, but he's not a victim in this case. These are the victims right here. He's alive. He's in jail. Sure, that might stink, but he's not dead. He's still living. So as far as people thinking he's a victim and boohoo for him, I don't work that way. So the real victims are Colette, Kimberly, Kristen, and their unborn son. Now, I don't know what they planned on naming him. I didn't find anything there. If I do find something, I might put a clip up or something, but at this point, I'm not sure. But I thought it was really important, and I think it's very important in the videos I do anyway, to mention the victims because that's what it's all about. All right, now I'm going to take a look back at what happened on the night of the crime. Now, keep in mind, what I'm going to go over real quick is Jeffrey MacDonald's account. So take that with a grain of salt because this is what he said happened. And clearly, as you'll see later on, the prosecution thinks it happened a completely different way. So let's go over this real quick. All right, according to Jeff, on February 16th, he took his daughters to, they had bought them a pony for Christmas. So he took them both to let them see the pony. I'm not sure if they rode it. I know they went out to spend some time with the pony. So he claims they did that, and then they got back home. And after they got back home, about 5:45, Jeff said he took a shower and then put on some old pair of blue pajamas. Later on that night, they had dinner. And after they had dinner, Colette had to go to night classes, so she went to her night classes. And Jeff claims after they did that, I don't know exactly what the time frame is in there, but he said he let his daughters ride on his back as if they were playing horsey, as he playing horsey on his back as if he was a Shetland pony. And so then about at 7 o'clock, he took Kristen, his younger daughter, and put her to bed. And as he was putting her to bed, he said Kimberly was playing a board game on the table. He later said that he fell asleep for about an hour, and then he woke up. He sat down and watched Kimberly's favorite show with her. It's called Laughing. And then after that, Kimberly went to bed. Now, according to Jeff, Colette got home from her school at about 9:40. And the two of them sat down and watched The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, which was a popular show at the time. And at about halfway through, Colette decided to go to bed. So Jeff just continued to lay on the couch, like I said, according to him, and he fell asleep on the couch. Now, at 3:42 a.m., dispatch at Fort Bragg received an emergency call from Jeff, where he faintly spoke in the phone, 4440 stabbing, hurry, 4440 Castle Drive stabbing, hurry. Before the receiver was either hit the floor or the wall, she couldn't tell. She just heard it drop. Okay, now all that sounds pretty normal as far as everything up to the very end, of course. So now we're going to go over real quick what the first responders saw when they showed up, and then we'll continue to move on. Within 10 minutes, the military police arrived at the location. They first thought they were arriving to a domestic disturbance. Now, they noticed that the front door was locked and all the lights were off, so they decided to go around the back where they saw that the screen door was locked, but the back door was wide open. Upon entering, the sergeant walked into the master bedroom before running to the front of the house, shouting, "Call Womack, call Womack." Now, Womack is a military-ran hospital, and it's named after a Medal of Honor recipient. His name is Bryant H. Womack. Okay, now I'm going to give you a fair warning here because this is the part where I'm going to go over the injuries that they found on Colette and the two little girls. So like I said, I believe in being thorough, but I'll go over this briefly, but it is going to contain some of the injuries that they received. And like I said, fair warning, it's pretty bad. Now, Colette was found on her the living room floor on her back in the master bedroom. Her one eye was open and one of her breasts was exposed, and she had been repeatedly bludgeoned about the body, and was later to have 2 broken arms. Now, the pathologist later claimed that he thought that her arms being broken were because he was trying to protect her face, which makes sense. As you're being hit, you're going to raise your arms in the air. In addition, she was stabbed 21 times in the chest with an ice pick and 16 times about the neck and chest with a knife. Now, when she was found, she had a bloody pajama top laying over her with a paring knife next to her. And Jeffrey was also laying next to her, face down with his arm over her chest. Now, as military personnel approached, Jeffrey whispered, "Check my kids, check my kids." And they later found 5-year-old Kimberly in her bed. She had been repeatedly bludgeoned about the head and body and was stabbed in the neck between 8 and 10 times. Now, it's said that Kimberly was laying on her left side and her face was shattered from at least 2 blows to her head, and that it had caused her cheekbone to come out of her skin. So like I said, pretty gruesome. Now, they later found that the wounds on her head were so sufficiently severe that it caused bruising to her brain. This is really bad. Now, across the hallway, 2-year-old Kristen was found in her bed, laying on her left side with a bottle next to her mouth. She had been stabbed 33 times across the chest, neck, and hands, and the back with a knife, and 15 times with an ice pick. Now, Kristen also had wounds to her hands, which were determined to be defensive wounds. On the headboard of the MacDonald bed was written the word pig in 8-inch capital letters, and the blood was later determined to be Colette's. Now, having received impromptu resuscitation, Jeffrey sat up and exclaimed, "Jesus Christ, look at my wife. I'm going to kill those goddamn acid heads." He was immediately taken to the Womack Hospital. All right, so I know that was pretty bad, and if you got through that, I know it's not easy, but I think it's important to go over that. Now, I apologize if you see me looking down every now and then because I'm trying to get things as factual as possible, and I want to look down to read it pretty much exactly what they had found. Now we're going to go over, quickly, the difference between the wounds that were suffered by his wife and children compared to what he suffered. And as you're going to see, there's quite a contrast. Now, as Jeffrey was taken to the hospital, the doctors discovered he had numerous wounds, but they were nowhere near as bad as his wife and children, of course. He had some cuts and bruises on his body. He had fingerprint scratches on his face and chest, and none of his wounds were life-threatening. Jeff was also found to have a mild concussion. Now, Jeffrey did receive a small stab wound to his right side between two ribs, and the doctors later described it as clean, small, and sharp, and it was measured about 5/8 of an inch in depth, and he had a collapsed lung. Now, we need to keep in mind that, not to be sexist or anything, but Jeffrey was a Green Beret, so he was combat, hand-to-hand training, and all that stuff. So if you're going to break into somebody's house, the first person you're going to go after is the biggest threat. Jeffrey, laying on the couch, according to him, he's the biggest threat. So you're not going to kill him. You're just going to beat him up a little bit, knock him out, and then proceed to kill his wife and children. For what reason? So to leave him alive with a small stab wound and some bruises, it doesn't make any sense. He was in the hospital for only 9 days. So I think that speaks for itself. All right, now we're going to go over what he initially told the investigators. Now, you're going to notice, or I noticed, that he never mentioned the horse ride or watching TV or even Kimberly playing the game on the table. I'm not really sure why he left that out. I mean, I just noticed that he did, but I just thought I'd point that out. Now, Jeffrey claims on February 17th at about 2 a.m. he decided to wash the dishes from the dinner they had, and he decided to go to bed afterwards, but that he couldn't go to his bed because his daughter, Kristen, had wet the bed, his side of the bed. So he didn't want to clean the sheets or wake his wife or anything, so he decided to go ahead and sleep on the couch. Now, I did forget to mention that Jeffrey claimed that he went to Kristen's room and grabbed a blanket, and then he went to sleep on the couch. He then was awoken by Colette and Kimberly screaming, and Colette shouting, "Jeff, Jeff, why are they doing this to me?" And he said as he rose up from the couch to try to aid to them, that he was attacked by 3 male intruders, 1 black and 2 white. Now, he later claimed that the shorter of the 2 males was wearing lightweight, possible surgical gloves, and that the 4th intruder he described as a white female with blonde hair, possibly a wig, and wearing high-heel, knee-high boots with a floppy hat partially covering her face. This individual stood nearby holding a lit candle, chanted, "Acid is groovy, kill the pigs." Now, Jeffrey claimed that the 3 males were hitting him with an ice pick and a club, while the female intruder was standing there shouting, "Hit him again." And during the struggle, his pajama top was pulled over his head, and he was using it to ward him off, but eventually he was knocked unconscious. When he regained consciousness, the intruders had left the house. He then stumbled room to room, attempting mouth-to-mouth resuscitation to his daughters with no avail. He then discovered Colette laying on the bedroom floor with a paring knife in her chest. He removed the paring knife, threw it alongside of her, and then draped his blue pajama top over her body before calling for help. Now, one thing I want to point out real quick, from everything I've ever seen, read, or heard anywhere, he's never varied from this story. So you can give him that. He's been consistent from day one. This is the story that he's told from the beginning, and the story he's still telling. Now, within minutes of the discovery at Castle Drive, the military decided to lock down the base and check any vehicles going in and out, looking for 2 white males, 1 black male, and a female with a floppy hat. Now, even though they did that right away, they never did find anybody that matched the description of those 3 intruders. Now, shortly after daylight on February 17th, the investigators discovered the 3 murder weapons outside the back door. One was an old hickory kitchen knife, an ice pick, and a 31-inch piece of lumber with 2 blue threads attached to it. Now, the investigators quickly discovered and determined that these weapons came from within inside the house, even though Jeffrey claimed he had never seen them before. Now, as investigators studied the physical evidence, they quickly determined that Jeffrey's accounts could not happen. I mean, he was combat trained, so there would be some big struggle in that living room. And the only thing they found was a coffee table laying on its side, a plant was tipped over, and some magazines were spread around. So if there was this big battle between all these men and a big struggle, there'd be a lot more than that. Now, as investigators talked to the neighbors said they didn't hear any sounds of a struggle, but they did say they heard Colette shouting in an angry voice. Now, their 16-year-old neighbor used to babysit for them. She did say that when she was there with them, that they didn't seem very close. They seemed kind of aloof with each other. So take that for what it's worth. Now, by February, they were no longer looking for the so-called assailants because they clearly didn't believe there was any. So they called that completely off. In addition to the lack of damage and evidence inside the house, they didn't find any blue pajama fibers in the living room, which is where Jeffrey had claimed he had this big old struggle with it wrapped around his hands. But they did find the fibers underneath Colette's body. They found it in both the daughters' bedrooms and under Kristen's fingernails. They also claimed they found it under Colette's fingernails, but they later lost that. Now, I know this is the 1970s and all, but this losing of evidence is ridiculous. Now, I know that happened. It has happened in some recent cases, but it doesn't make it any easier, and it's something that he can use for his defense, is that if they lost that evidence, what else did they lose? Now, there was blood stain from the lumber at the back door, and there was also blood stain in each of the bedrooms and where his wife was in the master bedroom. But there was no blood stains or splatter or anything in the living room where he claimed he was attacked. And they also didn't find any fingerprints on the wife or his children, or didn't find any fingerprints on the telephone. So if he claimed to do CPR or do all these things he claimed, then why wasn't there any fingerprints on their body? And obviously he was on the phone, and there was no fingerprints on the phone. So that's kind of weird. Now, one possible solution is that he was wearing gloves, because there was a tip of a surgical glove found beneath the headboard in the bedroom, which is where the riding a pig was. So they surmised that he probably was wearing gloves when he was doing this stuff. So that's why there was no fingerprints on any of their bodies or any of the other stuff, or the phone for that matter. And one other thing to point out is on 16th and 17th of February, as it is doing now outside, it was raining. And so if these intruders came in when it was raining and they were standing in his living room, there were fine footprints. There was no muddy footprints of any kind whatsoever in the house. So was no signs there was an intruder or intruders from the outside. Now, the only footprint that they did find was a bloody one. It was a bare footprint, and it was leaving Kristen's room, headed down the hallway. That's the only footprint that they found. Now, I would imagine in today's DNA that they'd be able to, or even without the DNA, you'd think they'd be able to tell whose footprint it was, because your feet kind of are like your hands, and they do have the ridges. So I'd imagine in today's DNA or today's technology, they'd probably be able to determine whose footprint that was. Now, some of this stuff, to his defense, some of this stuff can be possibly explained away, like the piece of wood and stuff being thrown, seen outside the back door. They could have theoretically, as they ran out, thrown it as they ran out. But for there to be no footprints anywhere, and the living room was barely tossed around, I guess you'd say. It didn't seem like there's any sign of a big struggle. And the only footprint was one bloody one, and it was a bare footprint. That doesn't look good for him, in my opinion. By mid-May, the CID, which is Criminal Investigation Division in the military, CID, they had the results of all the DNA, the fiber, and the blood and everything. And it definitely showed that Jeffrey's account couldn't be possible, because they found Kimberly's blood on the pajama top, even though he had claimed he wasn't wearing it at the time he was in her room. Now, Jeffrey's blood was located in significant quantities in only 2 locations. One of them was in front of the front cabinet where he kept the rubber gloves, and the other one was at the side of the hallway sink. Investigators also wondered why Colette's blood was found in Kim and Kristen's room, because Colette's blood was found in Kristen's room, yet all three bodies were found in different rooms. So she would have had to move at some point. The blood evidence also indicated that Kimberly's blood was in the master bedroom. So they surmised that she was attacked while she was in the master bedroom. And if that's the case, why would the intruders pick her up and put her back in her own bedroom? It doesn't make any sense. They would just leave her there. Now, one thing that's very unique in this case, and I personally don't think I've heard it anywhere else, is that all four family members had different blood types. So because of that, the investigators were able to determine the movements based on the blood types. And like I just mentioned, because everybody had a different blood type, they were able to come up with a likely scenario of the events of what happened. So we're going to go over that, and it's pretty detailed. Jeffrey was brought to trial on July 16, 1979, and charged with 3 counts of murder. He was tried in North Carolina before Judge Dupree and pled not guilty to all charges. One of the unique rulings I found in this case was that Judge Dupree refused to admit into evidence the 1979 physical evaluation of Jeffrey, which suggested that an individual of his personality and mindset was highly unlikely to be capable of killing his family. Now, that's pretty funny. Now, I personally completely agree with this opinion in this ruling because I'm not a doctor or anything, but anybody that's put in the right situation, and I mean anybody, is capable of killing, either to defend yourself, and I would hope that in your case or anybody's case, if you're a decent human being, it's to protect somebody's life or protect yourself. But everybody is capable of killing. So to have some kind of doctor say that you're not capable of it because of your intelligence or whatever, that insults our intelligence. Now, on the first day of the trial, Judge Dupree did allow the prosecution to enter into evidence a 1970 copy of Esquire magazine, which was found in Jeffrey's house, and it had an article on the Manson killings. So those of you who don't know who the Manson killings are, it's a really famous case. But their thinking was that he had used some of that magazine information that he got, some of the stories that he read in there about the blood being smeared, and because in that case they had writing on the wall. It said helter skelter in blood. So they're thinking that he used that article as kind of an inspiration, I guess you could say. So when they had Pig wrote on the bedroom wall, that he used part of that magazine as a guide in a sense. Now, real quick before I go any further, Jeffrey, because he was in the military, there's what they call an Article 32, which is like a hearing and a trial type of thing. And he was actually, all charges were dropped during that. So there's a whole detail in that where he, that was dropped, and then he was out for a while, and then he eventually was tried as a civilian. But I'm not going to go over all that because it's really not that important. All right, now as I was telling you earlier, because they had the different blood types, the prosecution had a very unique theory. I don't know if you want to call it unique, but they had a very detailed theory, almost step by step of what they said he did. Now, the prosecution, I don't know if you don't know anything about trials, the prosecution is not required to come up with a motive. They don't have to come up with a motive. They just have to put their evidence out there. But in some cases, they will give you a motive, especially if they think they know what it is or they have really good evidence of what they think it is. Now, in this case, because of the blood, they were pretty confident in what they thought happened. So we're going to go over that right now. So fair warning. It's a little detailed, so I apologize. I'm going to try to not take too long with it, but fair warning, it is pretty graphic. So let's get into that. Now, according to the prosecution, their theory is that a fight occurred in their bedroom. It was either over Kristen wetting the bed, or which is probably was an ongoing thing, because if he was to get that angry over it, it obviously didn't happen the one time. You'd figure that she'd probably done it more than once, which happens with kids. Or that over his adultery. So, because there was rumors that he had a wandering eye. So they figured it was between one or the other. And that this is where the fact that he keeps mentioning, and I didn't mention that earlier, I had written it down that I was going to, and I forgot, is that he was very adamant about mentioning that his daughter wet the bed. He mentioned it over and over, and he kind of was pointing it out. It was a big thing for him. not realizing that they were going to use it against him in a sense. But to be fair, you could also say that it kind of fits his theory in a sense that the reason that he was laying on the couch and was attacked on the couch is because she had wet the bed. So that was, it kind of fits his scenario of why he was on the couch. But so just trying to be fair. So let's move on. Now the prosecution says that during this point when they were arguing that she got angry with Jeffrey and hit him on the top of the head with her hairbrush, causing a cut on his forehead that just barely broke the skin. And he got angry and punched her and then picked up a piece of wood, which he had in the bedroom, and he hit her over the head with it. That's why they had blood splatter on the ceiling. And during this hitting of his hitting Colette, that Kimberly came into the room and he accidentally hit her. They claim they were able to come up with this theory because Kristen's blood was in the entryway of their bedroom. Believing that Colette was dead, Jeff carried Kimberly back to her room and then proceeded to stab her to death. Then he left her room and went to Kristen's room, carrying the club that he bludgeoned Kimberly with earlier, intending on getting rid of the last living witness. Before he could do so, Colette regained consciousness and went back into Kristen's room and draped herself over her daughter's body to protect herself. After Jeffrey killed them both, he wrapped up Colette's body in a sheet and carried her back to the bedroom, leaving the bloody footprint on the ground. Now, the CID investigators and the prosecution theorized that Jeffrey tried to cover up the crime by making it look like a Manson-type killing, which he had seen in that Esquire magazine. So he took a surgical glove, put it on, got some of Colette's blood, and above the headboard in their bedroom, he wrote the word pig, so people would come in and think it was the same type of killing. Jeffrey then laid his torn pajama top over Colette's body and stabbed it repeatedly, then grabbed the weapons, the ice pick and the piece of wood and a knife, wiped all the fingerprints off and threw them outside the back door. Then he went into the other room where the sink was and proceeded to stab himself, giving him the wound he had on his body. After stabbing himself, he later disposed of the rubber gloves he was wearing. He then called for help, walked back into the bedroom, lay down on the ground next to his wife, put his arm over her chest, and waited for the police to arrive. All right, now that's a lot to go over. Now, I remember as a kid watching a movie, it's called Fatal Vision, and it starred Gary Cole, and it's based on this. Now, there's a real interesting connection between this video and my next one. So if you want to see that real interesting connection, you're going to have to watch the next video, but it's really neat. But like I said, there's a movie, it's called Fatal Vision, starring Gary Cole, and it's based on this. Now, one thing they go over in the movie Fatal Vision that is really very unique is they go over this entire theory step by step, and it's really well done. So if you haven't seen that movie, I suggest seeing it because it makes more sense when you can actually see it. And this is by far one of the most complex theories I've ever seen, that I personally seen a prosecution team having. And I think it's because of the blood type, and all being different blood types, they were able to determine where people were in the movements. It was very unique. Now, shortly after 4 p.m. on August 29, 1979, the jury had deliberated for 6.5 hours and announced they had reached a verdict. Now, Jeffrey MacDonald was convicted of 1 count of first-degree murder in the death of Kristen and 2 counts of second-degree murder in the deaths of Colette and Kimberly. Now, Jeffrey himself showed no emotion because that's what dirtbags do, and the judge immediately sentenced him to 3 life sentences to be served consecutively. All right, guys, so this is the part in the video where I give you my opinion and tell you what I think. And I think it's probably pretty obvious. I think he's guilty. I don't think his story makes any sense. I've watched multiple things, read different articles, and like I said, this is an older case, so I'm pretty familiar with it. And I definitely think he's guilty. Like I said, his story doesn't make any sense. So I think that they definitely got it right. Immediately following the verdict, Alfred Kassab, who is Colette's father, by the way, phoned the family lawyer named Richard Kane, thanking him for his exhaustive effort in this case and saying he got exactly what he wanted, saying, quote, "Hi, Dick. I just got what I wanted. 3 life sentences. Thank you for everything. We couldn't have done it without your help." The Kassab family also informed the press, "This is something that had to be done. Now we can rest in peace." Now, at some point, Jeffrey would be released from prison on appeal, but he would eventually be returned, and that's where he is today, and that's where he belongs. Now, of course, there are others out there that have a lot of theories of their own. They say everything's a conspiracy, and there's a lot of controversy out there whether he did it or not, or whether they actually found the female intruder, which I didn't go into that. There's a whole deal on that. Her name was Helena Stokely, I think, and I'm going off my memory, so I'm not sure if I'm correct on that. But this definitely is a big case. There's been books, as I said. There's been movies or miniseries. So it's a very fascinating case. So I thought it was one that I should tackle, even though it's a long one for my first one. It's definitely a good one, in my opinion. All right, guys. Now that's going to do it for this case. Now let's discuss it in the comments and let me know what you think. Is he guilty? Is he innocent? Did he get it right? Or was he set up by the prosecution? Let's discuss it. I'm really interested in hearing what you guys have to think. I hope this was as informative for you as it was for me. So until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember to always mind your surroundings. Bye.